vital to remind the government that precisely what we said would happen if they lifted the no-fault eviction ban has now happened, and we have reached a new, shocking and shameful record figure of individuals, families, and worst of all, children in homelessness. And this is what the figures show, the biggest jump that we have seen in recent times in the number of people homelessness, who are driven into homelessness. And what's worst of all about the new figures is there's been a very, very dramatic spike in the number of families that are homeless and the number of children that are homeless. So we have another 92 families are now homeless, including 122 children who are put through the trauma of being homeless to add to the already more than 3,000 children who are living in homeless accommodation. So these shocking and shameless new record figures on homelessness are as a direct result of the disgraceful decision of the government to lift the no-fault eviction ban, and we will be demanding that the government respond to this shocking situation by reinstating the eviction ban. Now, undoubtedly, the government are going to respond by saying an eviction ban is only temporary. They've got longer-term solutions to solve the crisis, and they have alternatives like the tenant in situ scheme. But the facts, first of all, speak for themselves. We are seeing the number of people going into homelessness taking off in a very serious way. It had stabilised to some degree over Christmas. It's now taking off as a result of the eviction ban being lifted, and it is going to get worse as the implications of lifting the no-fault eviction ban roll on over the next number of months. So as a very minimum, the government need to stop the flow of people, families, and most of all children going into homelessness. But also it is the case that the tenant in situ scheme clearly does not have the teeth that are necessary. I mean, there's been some progress on it, and it's worth remembering we campaigned for the tenant in situ scheme for several years, and the government were forced into introducing it. But it is now becoming apparent, if you look at Tahani House, if you look at a number of other cases where the local authorities are attempting to buy houses in order to prevent families ending up homeless, landlords, investment funds are just saying, we're not selling to the council because we want a price gouge, we want a profiteer, we want to get extortionate prices, and we're not willing to deal with local authorities. So as a matter of urgency, the government need to prevent further people being made homeless and to give teeth to the tenants in situ scheme. They have to have a first refusal policy for the local authorities or the approved housing bodies or the tenants in situations where they're being evicted on grounds of sale. So in summary, we will be saying that as a matter of urgency to stem this disastrous homelessness situation, they need to reinstate the no-fault eviction ban, and they need to have a first refusal policy when it comes to local authorities trying to buy properties where people are threatened with eviction, so that greedy landlords can't simply profiteer from the situation and ignore councils who are trying to buy those properties.
Thanks. I'm going to leave immediately afterwards if there's any questions, because I have to go back to the Climate Committee. Just tomorrow morning we'll hear from Dr. Mary O'Shea, who was commissioned by the government to review the implementation of our Termination of Pregnancy Act, which was brought in January 2019. And following, it has to be said yet again, the magnificent victory of appeal, which has utterly changed the landscape for women and girls in this country and brought us out of the dark ages. But Mary O'Shea will talk tomorrow about where the problems lie. That's what she was asked to do, to identify what is the real lived experience of women and girls and, importantly, practitioners in this country. And I'm appealing particularly to Stephen Donnelly, but to all of the Cabinet, to listen carefully to her evidence as she presents it, rather than waiting for the Health Committee to come back. And the reason I'm doing that is that our bill will be voted on tomorrow night, our amendment to the Termination of Pregnancy Act, which would allow for many of the measures that she will recommend Number one, decriminalisation. Doctors can still face a 14-year sentence under the current practice. The 3-day wait, she will illustrate for us how that is causing a lot of discrimination against the most marginalised in the country and those who can't access service, but also often pushes a pregnancy over the limits that the law will allow. To lift the 12-week limit, which I'm going to ask her to show us how that affects women who have health and mental health issues, and also to forget what the last one was now, that's terrible, to lift the 12-week limit and to decriminalise, oh yes, the fatal fetal anomaly, this is a really important one. There's a 28-day limit under which doctors have to be able to say within 28 days this life is unviable and not compatible with life itself. That is way too restrictive, and she will illustrate that. And that's why I'm appealing today for the government ministers to listen to that debate as it happens before they vote tomorrow night on an amendment that Stephen Donnelly says is to push this down the road for another year. And in the meantime we will see 200 plus women and girls being forced out of this country to access abortion services. I'm further calling on Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael to allow their deputies a free vote. They did this in the lead up to the Act being introduced in 2018. At the end of 2018, the 2019 Act was brought in the 1st of January, and they gave a free vote to their deputies. I'm calling on them to do likewise again. Give your deputies a free vote on this issue. Don't use the whip, and allow the sentiment that Mary O'Shea will express tomorrow and the evidence, the very scientific, clear medical evidence that she will present, to be to see fruition, and to stop women having to wait and to exporting the problem yet again. Okay, thanks. Sorry. That they'll give a free vote, or? But I don't know. I mean, I don't know, Paul, to be honest. I don't read their minds too often, but I think we should pressurise them into it. I'm going to call for it today at Promised Legislation. There's an email campaign going into the deputies of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael calling for a free vote on the issue. But I think whether it's likely or not, it at least would be consistent, and it wouldn't be contradictory to the position they took at the outset of this debate 5 years ago. They should be consistent. If that's what they want to do, to give people their own free moral and political head on this, then they should do likewise again tomorrow night.
I want to bring up two issues. I want to bring up an issue relating to redundancies, and I want to bring up the issue of voluntary contributions in the schools. But first, on the redundancy issue, there's an issue that I intend to bring up with Taoiseach Leo Varadkar this afternoon in the Taoiseach questions slot. It relates to a situation that is taking place in a Cork company at the moment, but I think it has wider national implications. The company in question is a company that run like call centre operations, and they have an account which is the Airbnb account, and the Airbnb account is to be switched from the headquarters in Mahon in Cork to Bucharest in Romania. In Bucharest, the wages that are paid to a worker in this company average €8,000 per annum, and 44 workers at the Cork facility are being stood down from this account. The company have now said publicly that there may be redundancies as a result of this, and I think the implications here are huge actually. The idea that a company can switch from a plant in Ireland to a plant in Romania where €8,000 a year is the annual wage, and workers here suffer as a result of it, up to and including losing their jobs in a redundancy situation. It's a very serious situation, so I'm going to raise that issue with the Taoiseach this afternoon. The other point I want to make is around the issue of voluntary contributions in education. We're saying that cash has to be got out of the classroom. There should be a total ban on voluntary contributions. The report that was done for the Vincent de Paul shows that these voluntary contributions are not only rampant in the schools, are more often than not clearly designated as being voluntary as opposed to anything other than that, and humiliating in some cases for children. One school which put the names of all the kids whose parents had paid the voluntary contributions on the blackboard, and of course the kids whose parents didn't were left off the list. Humiliating for kids and real hardship for parents in a cost of living crisis. More stories of parents who've had to go without food, go without buying clothes, have had to borrow money in order to pay these so-called voluntary contributions. So the cash has to be got out of the classroom. They should be totally banned. They should be replaced by increasing the capitation fee. Capitation fee was €345 per child. It was cut down to €309 per child during the austerity years. If it was to be brought back to the 2010 levels, it would need to be €422 per annum per child as a minimum. That is what now should be done. Okay?
Yeah, I've been working for the last year and a half with hundreds of residents of apartments and duplexes who were affected by defects. They were all struck by the fire that happened at the kind of Sunday night in Blanchardstown. Obviously it was excellent news that nobody was injured. That was thanks to the work of the Dublin Fire Brigade, also probably thanks to the fact that it happened during the day. People were able to get out. I spoke to a resident who says that 2/3 of residents are still unable to access their apartments, about 1/3 are back in. And what was striking for all the residents was the speed at which the fire spread on the external of the apartment, 5 floors in 5 minutes. And I think regardless of the exact cause of the fire, obviously there's an investigation in terms of what happened in terms of that particular building. What happened in Blanchardstown underscores the urgency of action on defects in apartment and duplex buildings. It proves the fact that fires can and will happen in multi-unit developments, and it may be the case that the next one happens in a building which has significant fire defects. I mean, a majority of buildings built between 1991 and 2013 have defects, mostly fire defects, up to 80% of those buildings. And that would have obviously potentially devastating consequences for families living in these apartments. It's now almost a year. It was July of last year that the government got a report from the working group on defects in housing, which confirmed this, which illustrated the scale of the problem. And unfortunately, the government has been far too slow to respond. The government has given a commitment to the campaign, to the public, to the Dáil, that they're going to introduce a 100% redress scheme, but it is extraordinarily delayed. So the latest we have from the Minister is that a scheme will hopefully be in place by autumn of next year, 2024, whenever it's likely that we'll be on the cusp of a general election and a new government to be elected. The government initially, in response to the working group report, spoke about emergency funding, because clearly a full rollout of addressing the 100,000 apartments affected by defects, that is going to take time. There's no question about that. But the government spoke about emergency funding. Still, there's no details about that. And I think what happened in Blanchardstown has to change the speed of delivery of the scheme. It has to mean that emergency funding is prioritised. We need to urgently look at buildings, we need to inspect them, we need to see are there serious fire defects, and then we need to prioritise them for work. Because otherwise, the truth is that we're continuing in a situation where there's defects. We now know there's defects, but the majority of people who are affected by them don't know they're living in a building with defects, and we're taking a very significant risk. And that's what Blanchardstown underlines. So I'm going to be raising in the Dáil this week the need for massively accelerated delivery of this programme of redress, and in particular the need to provide a programme of emergency funding to ensure those that are most dangerous, most in need of work, are prioritised and are done this year and as soon as possible.